Right, hi there, people of YouTube, and welcome to this video. I'm going to be having a further conversation with Adam Hardyman, who is a very creative musician, and well, he's a man of a variety of different skills, which he can outline for you. But yeah, excited to chat to Adam about a number of things. We've agreed to freestyle this conversation. Do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself as an introduction, Adam? Or?
Okay, so yeah, that's a good start. What do I do? Um, so music is one of the things that we were going to talk about today. Music is my passion, but it has I'd call myself an electronic musician, but that has an interesting crossover to my kind of day job, which is healing, therapy, bioresonance, homeopathy, that kind of stuff. And I suppose the interconnection between those two things is frequency,
Mm.
and music being about frequency and healing being about frequency. So that's the kind of meeting point of the two disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that interests me a lot. Yeah, so I create music in the day, in the evenings, and do the therapy. Healing. Healing's a word that I struggle with, but yet I do kind of healing work in the daytime, and it's the combination of those two which is my kind of passion, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Well, and just for a context for other people to understand, I'm an electronic musician, DJ, long time fan of music in my kind of life since a teenager. I also help people with energetically sort of self-healing using muscle testing technologies, yeah, so music's always excited me, yeah, I think I shared in the previous video, I just saw some of your amazing creations on YouTube where you're jamming on iPad apps, really caught my ear and eye as well. So I think if anybody hasn't checked out Adam's creations online, there's certainly a treat there to watch his fingers magically creating things in real time on his iPad creations. But I think, yeah, well, I got back in touch with you because you'd released a new album since I last spoke to you 10 months ago. And also, I think on email you were talking about how you're exploring AI technology, and I was kind of coming back with a fairly clear anti-AI perspective.
It's a hot topic, huh?
Yeah, which for somebody who is typically somebody who, yeah, I'm not a conventional type. I'm more a kind of like my learning style is I normally like to not read the manual and experiment, or if someone tells me it works that way, I'll try and figure out what they're not telling me.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that resonate with you in terms of your sort of learning style, or have you got a different learning style with your kind of approach to music making? How would you summarize?
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't want to start with AI, but if we take that as an example, the problem with AI is the kind of generic, just recreating the past kind of um, nothing new kind of idea. It's just like it's trained on the past. So you're not gonna get anything creative with it because it's just looking back. So my entry was, can you do anything more interesting with it? Can you break it to, or make it do something which is creative? And can you use the technology in a more creative way? Like you said, don't read the manual and don't do perhaps what it's designed to do. Can you try and do something more creative with it? So yeah, I've definitely um, lean that way when it comes to music. Um, the album, if we take a step back, the album is kind of the opposite of that in a way because it was a reflection, not reflection, I got into modular music, creating music with modular synthesis, which kind of again goes back to this idea of the pure frequency thing. Because with modular synthesis, you're starting with a pure sine wave. It's about as basic as you can get. You start with a simple sine wave, and then you create from there with the various filters and amplifiers and devices to make music. So it's very pure in that sense. Whereas you could say with AI music, it's the opposite. You're starting with everything. So my the analogy I have in my head with how AI music works, not that I understand it, but is that it's closer to a sculpture. If you imagine you have a rock, and from that you break down the rock to find the sculpture within. Yeah, so you're starting with everything, big piece, and then you break it down. I think AI works a little bit more like that. It starts with almost like white noise, everything, and breaks it down into a piece of music. Whereas with modular, you're starting the other way around. You're starting with almost nothing. You're starting with a sine wave and
Right.
then building and building and building. So the album Rest in Noise was about that. It's like, well, it was the reason I wanted to make an album was because that process, I recorded that process of trying to understand how sound works and trying to understand a sine wave to a filter to an amplifier and creating these complex pieces of music. Um, the beauty, I think we mentioned this before, but the beauty of that kind of music is you start with something and I rarely understand where it's going to end up. You end up with this piece of music and you have no idea how you've got there, or I have, it just becomes this organic process. Um, literally, the good bit of modular music was after like an hour of playing with it, you kind of sit back and you have this piece, and as I said, you have no idea how you get there. It's just become this thing. It's like I can't even remember how the sounds that are coming out are coming out. So it's that's the exciting bit of modular music. And I think we're going to reference the previous talk quite a lot because in my mind I'm thinking, have I already said this last time? But
Yeah.
anyway, last time it was the difference between, it's the Brian Eno quote, the difference between architecture and gardening. Was that a simile I used last time?
I haven't watched that interview back for a while. Could be
Okay.
possible, entirely possible.
Okay, so modular music, I think it was gardening. So this is again a Brian Eno quote. So gardening is you starting with a seed and you can plant it and tend for that seed and you can kind of help it grow, but you don't really know where it's going to end up. It has its own life, yeah?
Okay.
Versus architecture, which is you start with trying to work out where you're going to go. You develop a blueprint of what you want to create, and then you create that blueprint, yeah? So architecture is not the kind of music I've ever been interested in. I never have an idea of what I want to create before I create it.
Okay.
It's always an organic process.
Right.
So the modular completely fits that idea. You start with this basic sound, see where you end up, and often, well, always, it's never where you think you're going to end up. Even if I sat down and thought, I'm going to write an ambient piece today, it doesn't end up that way.
Okay.
So that album, Rest in Peace, was, I think there's to do an album these days, you've got to be sure that it's something worth putting out there because there is a lot of music out there. I think the stats are something like hundreds of thousands of pieces of music released on streaming platforms every day. And I think the stats are now one day, there's more music released in one day than there was in the whole of the 1970s.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay.
So it's thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of pieces of music released every single day. So you have to think, well, to add to that, what am I, what can I offer that's not already been done or. So the album was really, as I said, a journey for me of exploring these ideas of what happens if I start with a simple sine wave and end up with a piece. So it felt like a body of work that kind of had to start, beginning and end. It was a journey for me of exploring modular synthesis. So yes, I think it's a challenging listen because it's not about melody. I don't know if you've had a good listen to it, but it's not a nice piece of music which it doesn't even really have start, beginning, and end. It doesn't have a melody that you would necessarily um, immediately pick up on. It's not formatted in classical sense. So it is quite challenging listen. And I think it is about that kind of music is about listening, which kind of sounds obvious, or maybe all music is about listening, but this album particularly is about listening to what is happening and trying to find interest in that process of, I think one of the leading ideas I had with the music was that I never wanted to hear the same sound twice. You put an input in, say a sine wave, and then see how you can manipulate that sine wave. And then once it's been manipulated once, you see if you can manipulate it again so it doesn't repeat itself.
Okay.
So by the end of the piece, you've got this movement that's constantly, I don't think it's never repeats itself, but that's the idea, it's constantly trying to create. So to listen to it, you kind of have to get in that headspace of not trying to. Repetition is a common thing in music, which people tune into. People like repetition, and that's where a lot of people get into certain tracks. But in a way, I was trying to get away from that repetition and
Okay.
see if I could get something that's organically growing, the gardener, the piece that grows into something
Mhm.
bigger. But as I said, it's challenging because it's not about melody. I think last time I also explained that I was exploring modern classical music,
Right.
and modern classical music is very um, challenging because it's moved away from melody. It's
Right.
moved away from classical music, major, minor harmony, and trying to create something new all the time. So this idea of major, minor harmony is almost old fashioned. So you're so yeah, that would largely influence the pieces. I think the that's a long book. Where is it? Rest in Noise. Sorry. The title comes from, it's pinched from this book, The
Okay.
Rest, The Rest is Noise, which is a book
Okay.
about modern classical music and how it's got from there to today. So that was a big influence on the album, this idea of moving away from, moving into atonal music, but trying to make it interesting.
Yeah, it's quite an intriguing thing. I think I would offer up that musically wise, and just to give listeners a parameters, I kind of, when I was young, I was quite into industrial electronic music, which was
Hmm.
slightly angry, slightly metronomic, quite tightly kind of rigid electronically. And I think perhaps at that time of that was going to be the early 80s. I heard something in that was relevant for me at the time. But I think it's really interesting, like some of the dynamics you're talking about, because now I deeply value music that's got melody, groove, funk, what I would classify as kind of soul. And I think it's an interesting thing from a deeper kind of human language kind of point of view. Melody is always from it seems to be out there that resonates with people, because so when I listen to music, I'm always listening to music that I know that I've chosen typically. I've got a big library of music on my phone. I don't have Spotify choosing music for me. And so I'll know mood setting wise, okay, if I'm relaxing, I might want this, or I might want that, or this, my wife might say in a beautifully creative way, play me something round and bouncy. That might be her way of kind of summarizing her relationship with what she's looking for in sound. And the one thing I was going to sort of feedback or run back to you is there's a few times I've been to gigs recently that are almost could be in the same ballpark of what you're describing, that are very atonal,
Mhm.
very lacking, and I felt very vibrationally very cold and not much of a language. Sometimes they've been sold out shows. Sometimes half the audience are all clapping afterwards, and quite a few times I've been going, "Wow, that really didn't." It felt really soulless and cold, and it was, yeah. So how do you feel when you? So when you were talking about things, I was just wondering about the how you feel when are you looking to feel uncomfortable, are you enjoying feeling uncomfortable, or do you sometimes look for, because to me when I'm listening to music it's about vibrationally feeding myself,
Mhm.
um because everything's all vibration, so what you expose yourself to me is quite important, which is why I'm kind of fairly strong position about AI, because I don't energetically vibrationally. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, so there's quite a few questions in there. Feel free to cherry pick whichever ones that resonate to respond to.
I think you've hit an important nail on the head there in that my criticism of modern classical music, to go back to that, is the lack of, my sense is it has a lack of emotion.
Right. Okay.
And it is very heady stuff. It's very intellectual.
Mm.
And to crack the emotion of it sometimes is really hard. And even as I was explaining how I made the album to you, it does sound very technical and um, not about emotion. So yeah, I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of working on a process which is very technical, say, and less about how it makes me feel. I recognize that.
Mm.
And this does get interesting when we start talking about music as healing, because again, one of the things that paralyzes me when it comes to music and therapy or sound healing is I get a bit technical about it because I'm trying to work out what frequency,
Right.
so if we're taking music into healing, then the question is, how do we do it? What frequency may have a resonating effect with that person?
Mm.
What technique? What, lots of questions about how to create healing. I keep using that word, can't get away from it,
Mm.
um, in music. And when I talk to people about it, there's a lot of people, particularly women, which is interesting, would say, how does it make you feel? What do you feel about it, rather than
Right.
technical
Yeah.
frequencies? And so I definitely have a challenge there. My
Right.
Apple my Apple Pencil, which I use to do a lot of my music, says, uh, "Feel it, don't think it." As
Okay.
I've written on there as a reminder, because I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can get lost in
Right.
that world of thinking. So yeah, it is an interesting challenge. So let's take sound therapy and frequency therapy. If I was to send a specific frequency to you, keep it simple. Let's go back to sine wave, and that frequency was 432 hertz.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, you would see how it made you feel,
Mm-hmm.
rather than how it would make you think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, but yeah, it's almost a dichotomy for me, because the reason it's paralyzing, because I do get a little bit wrapped up in what is the right frequency and what should I be doing, rather than just doing
Right.
something, seeing
Yeah.
how it makes someone feel,
Yeah.
or what response they have to it. So yeah, it's a really important point. Um, I don't know how to, I suppose, I mean, when listening to the kind of music that I'm talking about, I hope it would have an emotional response in some way, but I also recognize that it could be a little bit dry or technical.
Right. When
Interesting.
you were describing your process earlier of creating with a modular setup, I was a
Yeah.
I was a little I could understand certain aspects, but I couldn't quite understand whether you were saying, for example, the recent album that, there is some short pieces, isn't there? And I didn't
Yeah.
know whether that process of you experimenting was live there in that short piece, or whether the short piece was an excerpt from a longer recording that you'd um, uh, because I get that kind of like, yeah, sometimes music, sometimes I like going to see bands, and sometimes that energy when a band, you could tell they're partly freestyling or improvising. And
Mhm.
it's an amazing band called the Necks. I don't know if you've heard of the Necks from Australia, but absolutely astounding musicians who improvise long pieces, and there's just three of them. And I'm hoping I can interview some of them. I mean, they're astounding musicians.
NEX or Next?
The next,
Next.
yeah, yeah,
Oh, okay. No, I don't know them.
yeah. They're absolutely superb musicians who can freestyle. And but I think, yeah. So you sit and watch them, and you know they're in the process of creating, but they've got an amazing reference point of how to play the drums, piano, or double bass. That's their palette, but within that, the where they can sprinkle and flow, and yeah, it's quite incredible. And so, but yeah, going back to your album, just as a micro example, was some of those short pieces, was that you kind of like in that kind of flow state? It sounded like a flow state. but partly also a really mental state as well. So there's an interesting
Yeah.
parameters.
Do you know what? I can't actually remember,
Yeah, okay.
but I think the idea was to create, so that what I wanted to do with that album was to try and make it feel like it was one long piece
Right. Okay.
rather than lots of separate pieces, and I wanted to join it all together. So some of those pieces were what I call glue pieces. You know, how do I get from this place to this place?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
So they were excerpts of transitions. I'd call them transitions.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
That proves to be quite a difficult thing to do technically. So streaming platforms don't actually like one long piece, so
I
you have
know.
to have individual tracks. So it became a bit of a technical nightmare. But yeah, I think that there were glue pieces.
Mhm.
Uh, Interesting. Another point I want to pick up with what you were saying about mood and listening to music. I think there is and this is about AI again, I'm afraid, but we've got to the point now where you can ask an AI program to write a piece of music for you in a specific style.
Mhm.
So you could ask it to write, what was the example you used earlier? A poppy, a certain style of music that you wanted to listen to. You can ask an AI piece of music, program to write that music for you in real time. So I think, for better or worse, that's going to be something that is in our future. So say you wanted to listen to something very specific, you could ask that AI program to make it for you in real time rather than listening to something you've heard before.
Mhm.
And that creates a new kind of interest because it's always fresh, it's always new. Nobody's ever heard that piece of music before. In
I
which
get.
to
Yeah, but to me, a fundamental point would be that it's not something that a human's created.
No, I know that's the
Yeah,
problem.
and
Yeah.
I think for me it's an interesting time for creators. I always so my take on AI is very kind of anti it because I think well, music's about music. You know, whether it's the amazing music that's come out of Africa. You know, the eons of passing down.
Mm.
Very deep cultural traditions through music, through tribes, through rituals. To me, when people start to just out of this idea of I can grab something quickly, I can press this button, and I feel really strongly about that on a human level. I'm like, well, if you yeah, it's just, I mean, so I'm familiar with this kind of slightly back in the day when it was acid house, it's slightly punk rock way of music used to be this. Some things can happen on computers, but people were still using that computer technology and they were still thinking about groove. There was still soul in some of that really good music. You know, the soul that's put into it really stands out, and I think that for me is the big risk with this kind of playing with AI technology that you get people are starting to interact with something that doesn't have intelligence. I would suggest it might be able to analyze certain things, but a lot of I'm very into the idea that sometimes you can listen to music from particular times and you can really feel the soul of that particular musician or group of musicians, even,
Absolutely.
even if they are using electronic technology to make it. So I think at a deeper level, human spiritual intention is encoded into music that we hear.
Hmm.
There's plenty of music I can hear straight away and go, oh, I don't like that. You know, I've got a neighbour who lives next to me in my street, and quite often outside, if the sun's nice, he'll play music, and I'm like, oh, it's like I can feel the anger in the music, and I'm thinking, yeah, I think it's I think technology-wise, we've got this newer generation of you're a parent, I'm a parent, my children are growing up. But I think like there's some real deep level stuff that's very interesting because I think if you get, if we allow a younger generation to not have values on certain things, then where does it go? You know, you could end up having a future of people who are just listening to music created by AI, thinking it's good and not able to realize that yeah, so I think ethically, like trying to have a standpoint on it's quite an interesting proposition. But I don't know if you would agree or.
Yeah, I agree with all that you're saying, and
Okay.
it's a hugely debated topic, obviously. I mean, we probably couldn't even touch the surface of what it means for creators, what it means for music, what it means for kids. It is a troubling conversation, but I suppose for me, being a musician, I wanted to understand it more. So better the devil you know kind of thing, rather than not understanding it. So that's why I kind of dived into it, which is what a lot of people are doing. And I suppose it could go different ways. Some people will embrace it, some people won't. It's definitely here to stay. There's no two ways about it. It's here, it's happening. Um, and so what I've been doing recently, and again, I don't want to get too wrapped up in ethical conversations because that is, I mean, whether it's taking work away from musicians, it is taking work away from musicians, and there's no two ways about it. Whether it's dampening creativity or enhancing creativity is a big subject. Is it making us less creative or more creative? For example, if I'm in my music room and I'm writing, and suddenly I think what I'd like on this piece is a Japanese Kyoto, and I haven't got one, but I can get AI to create one for me in the moment. That is a creative tool that I didn't have before. And so I do, that's just a simple example of how it can be creative. Again, we're taking work away from the Kyoto player, but I wouldn't have had the means to get a Kyoto player in that moment. So there is a creative uh, help there if you need it or want it. So it's a bit like the Wild Wild West at the moment. It's really confusing and exciting and troubling all at the same time.
Okay.
So what I've been doing is writing my modular music and then putting it into an AI program. And then you can ask the AI program to um, interpret your own music or see what it does with it, kind of thing. So it spits out an interpretation of your own piece. And the first thing that makes me do is go, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that. It changes my perception of my own music. And then that starts a whole nother creative process. So I'll then take that music, do something with it, change it. So it becomes this kind of this organic interaction between me and the AI. And then maybe that's me trying to justify using the technology, but it's certainly taking me to places I wouldn't have gone otherwise. And yeah, I'm still, I've got a funny feeling that the whole process will take me back to writing to the sine wave stuff, where you just start with the basics. Because sometimes when you have everything at your fingertips, it's too much. You need restrictions and you need to go back to something quite simple. So that could happen. This is what I mean about better the devil you know. It's like, let's see what this can do,
Mm.
see where it takes me. I'm not going to release, I do have a problem when someone just writes a funk tune on the style of, the 70s and gets the AI program to write the lyrics for it and then just puts a piece of music out and says,
Right.
this is my music. I'm not into that. It's like, as I said, how can you use the tool creatively? And
Okay.
maybe this is the whole thing with the AI is how humans and computers can work together. There's no doubt that within some of the healing modalities, there's people using AI to further the knowledge we have of the body and biology and energy and all that kind of stuff. And so there's great strides being made because of the interactions with humans and AI. But so it is this pull to fro thing that we're having with technology that's problematic but helpful.
Uh,
Problematic, helpful.
it's an interesting one though, that on that particular point, I think when you've got humans interacting with a non-human,
Mhm.
I think one of the things I will do when I publish this, I will link to the thing that I sent you from the radionics chap
Mhm.
called Daniel Magnum, who'd done a piece.
Yep,
I think
I
you
read it.
might
Yep.
find it interesting. But I think for me, that kind of, it's just that fundamental point. If you're interacting with something that is a human design, but and it claims to have intelligence, I think for me that was quite interesting. That piece that almost what I took out of Daniel Mangum's piece was that he was kind of saying that AI is very clever at listening to your written or your verbally expressed expressions and giving you back things you want to hear, but not and potentially talking like with authority. But again, it's all just programmed responses trying to meet your intellectual or emotional needs. Potentially is how I would interpret it. And so I think, there's lots of fantastic things within the human existence that can be analysed by AI, and there's loads of interesting things to do with sound and healing that are magical and fantastical as well.
Yes.
And I think that going back to that piece of human intention, sometimes the human intention that is imbued into creating music or performing music can be quite powerful. And
Yes.
that's the I feel like, if I give you an example, there's one time I met somebody for a cup of coffee, and me and my wife met them, and there was a mural getting painted outside the property, and somebody came in, but they pronounced it mural instead of mural,
Mhm.
And so, but this person straight away got on their phone and started reading out, like verbatim, the Google description of what a mural was. And I was kind of, well, first of all, I knew what a mural was because I've studied fine art and I know what, but the person had this sort of addiction, I would say, to getting a phone out, to explaining exactly what was on a phone, and not like being in the moment. And they were letting technology almost interfere in the human interactions, and they were quite happy with it. They were openly going, "Let me read to you what's on Google straight away because we've got an issue here that we need to resolve," was his perspective.
Interesting.
And I think if people aren't aware of their relationships with technology, it could, it's an interesting one. How do we have a standpoint? I also went into a cafe once for coffee recently, ordered my coffee, turned around, and every single person I looked
Staring at
around
the phone.
was just like this, even couples next to each other. And it seemed to be a cultural norm of like, how do we to me, make standpoints on these things culturally, but partly to vibrationally communicate with other humans in that particular cafe situation, or educate our children about the parameters of these things. The deeper human values is quite an interesting thing to ruminate on. I think for me,
Absolutely.
so. Because I think that whole new generation of like young people being so pulled in by these mobile phone technologies might influence them just going, yeah, okay, like you said, I want a funk tune and I've made this lyric, AI write this, and it sort of cheapens and negates all that artistic culture that a lot of us really, there's lots of older pieces of music I can still listen to and go, wow, it still resonates with me now. But so these are interesting parameters to these things, aren't they?
They're certainly interesting times to be alive.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And I
and
think,
having a young daughter that's glued to her screen and it's problematic, definitely.
mm,
I think, as I said, knowing the devil is important for me to rather than ignoring it, which I think as a parent you can't do. You need to understand what it is that children are interacting with. ChatGPT in schools is quite prominent now. This idea of asking a chatbot questions to get answers for things at school is already a reality. It's just like, oh. So of course, as parents, we're going to struggle with these things, and it is probably AI is the new thing for everybody to be worried about. Maybe when we were kids, there was other things to worry about, and the parents had different things to worry about, and now it's AI is the thing that we all have to worry about. So, yeah, I don't want to spend the whole time talking about AI, but
yeah.
it's it's yeah. For some reason, it's making me think of a. I think intention was the word you used earlier, and intention is an interesting topic that I did want to talk about. So going back to we still got plenty of time.
Well, what I was going to say was we've got about 2.5 minutes left, it
Oh,
says.
okay, so let's
So we
start a big new
can, we
subject.
can either wind up and park some of these and think about them in the break and come back afresh, which
Yeah,
feels like it might be a better thing, that we could both kind of think about those and come back and continue the conversation with that.
let's
Allow
let's
you?
do that because I've got somewhere else that I'd like to go next. Yeah,
Oh,
so let's do that.
brilliant. Okay. chat to you in about 9 minutes, Adam. Thanks.
Okay, 9 minutes.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thank you.